Hello, my dear lore seekers. Welcome back to another evening journey into the heart of beloved worlds. Tonight, we take flight not just into the night sky, but into the very history of a sport that defines a universe. Settle in, let the quietude embrace you, and prepare your minds for a deep dive into the thrilling, often brutal, and utterly magical saga of the wizarding world's greatest pastime. Let us soar back through centuries, from muddy marshes and savage skies to the grandest arenas, as we uncover the complete history of Quidditch, from the flight of the Golden Snidget to the roar of the World Cup. Before we begin, if you find value in our stories, please take a moment to like and subscribe, or check out our Patreon link in the description below. Your support is what allows us to continue these journeys together. We appreciate it more than you know. And now, let's begin. Our story does not begin on a manicured pitch with cheering crowds, but in the dim and distant past, when the very act of flight was a new and perilous frontier. Long before the invention of the cushioning charm, the relationship between a wizard and his broomstick was one of hardship and endurance. The earliest known depiction of broomstick flight comes to us from a German illustrated manuscript, dated to the year 962. It shows not graceful athletes, but three warlocks dismounting their brooms with expressions of exquisite discomfort etched upon their faces. An early written account from the period is even more direct, speaking of the common ailments of the medieval aviator as splinter-filled buttocks and bulging piles. These first brooms were crude instruments, often little more than a single branch of polished ash with twigs bound crudely to one end. The charms placed upon them were rudimentary, allowing for only the most basic of movements: forward, up, down, and stop. There was no variation in speed, no subtlety in control. Each family would typically construct their own brooms, meaning that the quality of one's flight depended entirely on the skill of the builder, leading to a wild variance in comfort and reliability. Yet, despite these painful beginnings, the allure of the open sky was irresistible. The broomstick was the perfect tool for a magical community living in the shadow of Muggle suspicion. It was portable, it was cheap, and unlike a griffin or a hippogriff, it required no feeding and could be easily disguised as a mundane object. It was from this foundation of practicality and pain that the very first stirrings of aerial sport would emerge. Witches and wizards, having mastered the art of staying aloft, inevitably began to wonder who among them could do it fastest, highest, or with the most daring. Before Quidditch unified the wizarding world under a single set of rules, the skies were a patchwork of chaotic and often lethal regional pastimes. These ancient broom games were the primordial soup from which Quidditch would eventually crawl, each contributing a vital piece of DNA to the sport we know today. They were brutal, they were unregulated, and they were a testament to the wizarding world's long and complicated relationship with competitive danger. Our journey through these savage skies begins in the frozen north, with the oldest recorded broom sport in history, the annual broom race of Sweden. Dating all the way back to the 10th century, this grueling competition was not a game of balls and goals, but a pure, unadulterated test of speed, endurance, and sheer nerve. The race course was an immense and treacherous path, stretching over 437 miles from Kopparberg in the south to Arjeplog in the north of Sweden. This was no simple sprint. It was an aerial marathon that tested the limits of both rider and broom. What made the race truly legendary, however, was its most perilous feature. The course ran directly through a dragon reservation, home to the formidable Swedish short snout. Competitors had to navigate not only the harsh Nordic weather and the immense distance, but also the very real possibility of being incinerated by a territorial dragon. The danger was so integral to the race's identity that the grand prize, a massive silver trophy, was forged in the shape of a Swedish short-snout dragon. Despite, or perhaps because of, this extreme danger, the race became an immensely popular annual event. Even today, wizards and witches from all over the world gather in Kopparberg to witness the frantic start, before apparating north to Arjeplog to congratulate the survivors. The Swedish broom race established a fundamental principle in the wizarding sporting psyche, that high-speed competitive flight was a thrilling spectacle in its own right. It was the first pillar of what would become Quidditch, the element of pure, exhilarating speed, a tradition carried on by the desperate chase for the Golden Snitch. Moving south into Germany, we find a game that, while just as violent, introduced two concepts that would become central to the future of Quidditch: a goal and a goalie. This was the brutal game of Stichstock, first recorded in a painting from 1105 featuring a wizard known only as Gunther the Violent. Stichstock was a popular German pastime that flourished until its decline in the 14th century. The objective was simple and savage. A 20-foot-high pole was erected, and at its peak, an inflated dragon bladder was fixed as a target. The players, flying on brooms with specially sharpened handles, would take turns flying at the pole, attempting to be the first to puncture the bladder. What made the game a true sport, however, was the addition of a defender. A single player, known as the Bladder Guardian, was tied to the pole by a rope around their waist, preventing them from moving more than 10 feet away from it. This guardian was not only allowed to physically block the attackers, but was uniquely permitted to use their wand to hex and jinx opponents, desperately trying to stop them from reaching the target. The game would end in one of 3 ways. The dragon bladder was successfully pierced. The Bladder Guardian had hexed all opponents out of the running, or, in a testament to the game's grueling nature, the Guardian simply collapsed from exhaustion. Stichstock represents a crucial evolutionary leap. It is the clear ancestor of the chaser and keeper positions. The dragon bladder was the first stationary goal, and the Bladder Guardian was the first dedicated defender, a lone player tasked with protecting a target from multiple attackers. The explicit inclusion of offensive magic in the rules also highlights the brutal, anything-goes mentality of these early sports, providing a stark contrast to the highly regulated Quidditch of today, where using a wand against another player is strictly forbidden. From Germany, we traveled to Ireland, home of a game that valued agility and precision over brute force. The game of Eingingain was a thrilling and fiery spectacle, a favorite subject of Irish ballads, and a true test of a rider's skill. The objective was to take a goat's bladder, known as the Dom, and fly it through a series of flaming barrels set high in the air on stilts, all against a timer. The ultimate goal was to complete the course without setting oneself on fire, a feat that required incredible speed and maneuverability. The legendary Irish wizard Fingal the Fearless was a celebrated champion of Eingingain, his name a testament to the courage required to even participate in such a sport, while Stichstock had a single static goal to be attacked. Eingingain introduced the concept of a dynamic course, a series of targets that had to be navigated with precision. It was the first game to involve passing an object through a goal, a direct precursor to the modern act of a chaser throwing a quaffle through one of the 3 hoops. The ever-present danger of the flaming barrels only served to underscore the extreme risks that were considered an acceptable, even celebrated part of these ancient pastimes. Yet for all the danger of dragon reserves and flaming barrels, no game in the history of broomstick sports was more lethal than the Scottish invention, Creaothceann. Considered the most dangerous of all broom games, Creaothceann was a true spectacle of brutality that was immensely popular in the Middle Ages, despite its staggering fatality rate. The rules were as simple as they were horrifying. Each player would strap a large cauldron to their head using thick leather straps. At the sound of a horn, hundreds of rocks and boulders, which had been enchanted to hover 100 feet in the air, would begin to fall towards the ground. The players would then fly around at high speed, attempting to catch as many of the falling rocks as possible in their head-mounted cauldrons. An 11th century Gaelic poem about a Creaothceann match grimly recounts how 10 of the 12 men who participated were killed. Given that players were essentially inviting enchanted boulders to fall directly onto their heads, it is no surprise that the game caused a huge number of fatalities. It was finally and wisely made illegal by the Ministry of Magic in 1762. Despite its lethal nature, the game had its devoted fans, and as recently as the 1960s, a wizard by the name of Magnus Denthead MacDonald spearheaded a campaign for its reintroduction, a campaign the ministry firmly refused. Creaothceann, in its terrifying simplicity, is the undeniable ancestor of the bludger. It introduced the revolutionary concept of a third element to broomstick sports, not a ball to be scored or defended, but an aggressive, autonomous aerial hazard that players had to avoid while simultaneously trying to play the game. The sheer violence of Creaothceann provides the perfect context for the later development of Quidditch, a sport that sought to incorporate this element of random danger, but in a far more controlled and survivable manner. The eventual banning of the game also represents a significant moment in wizarding history, showing the first major intervention by a governing body to regulate a popular sport in the name of public safety, a trend that would profoundly shape the evolution of Quidditch. Not all early broom games, however, were a matter of life and death. In England, a pair of more pastoral and recreational pastimes flourished, demonstrating the widespread, casual nature of broom-based sports. The first of these was Swivenhodge, a game that originated in Herefordshire. In this peculiar sport, players would sit backwards on their brooms and use the twiggy end to bat an inflated pig's bladder back and forth over a tall hedge, much like a game of tennis. The player who missed the bladder would concede a point to their opponent, and the first to reach 50 points was the winner. The other popular English game was shunt bumps, a Devon pastime that was essentially a magical form of jousting. The goal was simple: to fly at your opponents and knock as many of them off their brooms as possible, with the last person still airborne being declared the victor. While Swivenhodge and shunt bumps never achieved the international fame or notoriety of their more violent counterparts, they were important in their own right. They show that flying on a broom for fun was a common part of everyday wizarding life, creating a culture where a more complex and organized sport could easily take root. The back-and-forth nature of Swivenhodge is a clear, if primitive, precursor to the passing and territorial play of chasers, while the aggressive, physical confrontation of shunt bumps also feeds into the lineage of the bludger. Together, this tapestry of ancient games, the Swedish race, German Stichstock, Irish Angingane, Scottish Creaothceann, and the English folk games, demonstrates that all the core components of Quidditch were already present in the wizarding world. Speed, goal scoring, aerial hazards, and physical challenges all existed in some form. All that was needed was the right time, the right place, and the right combination of ideas for them to fuse into something entirely new. And so we arrive at the birthplace of Quidditch itself, not in grandeur, but in the humble setting of a muddy English marsh. The story of Quidditch as a single, unified sport begins, as so many great things do, in a damp, unremarkable patch of ground in medieval England. It was not born in a grand stadium or conceived by a committee of experts. It was an organic creation, a chaotic fusion of older traditions that coalesced in the 11th century on a nettle-filled bog known as Queerditch Marsh. For our knowledge of this pivotal moment, we owe everything to the cantankerous diary of a witch named Gertie Kettle, who happened to live on the edge of the marsh, and much to her annoyance, became the first chronicler of the wizarding world's greatest sport. Gertie Kettle's diary, written in badly spelled Saxon, and now preserved in the Museum of Quidditch in London, provides a perfect, if grumpy, window into the game's birth. Her earliest entries from around the year 1050 are simple complaints. "Tuesday, hot," she wrote. "That lot from across the marsh have been at it again, playing a stupid game on their broomsticks. A big leather ball landed in my cabbages. In this first primitive form, the game was nothing more than players on brooms throwing a leather ball back and forth, attempting to score by getting it past their opponents and through the trees that marked each end of the marsh. This was the earliest incarnation of the quaffle and the goal hoops. Kettle notes that she confiscated the ball after it ruined her cabbages, only to have a hexed man come and demand it back. Her next entry shows that the players were undeterred, having simply made a new ball and continued their game. A short time later, however, a dramatic new element was introduced. Now they've got two big heavy rocks flying around trying to knock them all off their brooms, Kettle wrote with a hint of morbid curiosity. Unfortunately, didn't happen while I was watching. These bewitched flying rocks were the forerunners of the Bludgers, and their introduction marked the true moment of Quidditch's conception. It was the fusion of a scoring game like Swivenhodge with a game of aerial hazards like Creaothceann. In fact, Kettle's diary mentions the presence of a big Scottish warlock among the players on the marsh around this time, and it is widely believed that this individual, likely a former Creaothceann player, was the one who introduced the idea of enchanted, aggressive projectiles to the game. This combination of scoring and survival was the spark of genius that would define Quidditch for the next millennium. The game's popularity grew rapidly, and by the 12th century it was already evolving. Our next glimpse into its development comes from a letter written by a Yorkshire wizard named Goodwin Kneen to his Norwegian cousin, Olaf. In this letter, Kneen describes a match of what he calls Quidditch against a team from Ilkley. His letter reveals several crucial developments. The game now had a proper name, a clear homage to its birthplace on Queerditch Marsh. It also had established player positions. Kneen refers to one of his teammates, Radolf, getting hit in the head by a bludder, the early name for the bludger because another player, Uga, wasn't quick enough with his club. This is the first mention of a player dedicated to defending others from the flying rocks, the ancestor of the beater. Kneen also mentions that his wife, Gunhilda, was supposed to play as catcher, the early term for a chaser, but had to sit out due to a case of dragonpox. Most significantly, the goals had been upgraded. The players were no longer aiming for trees, but for large barrels fixed atop stilts at each end of the pitch. From Gertie Kettle's Stupid Game to Goodwin Kneen's Quidditch, the sport was rapidly formalizing, gaining a name, defined roles, and purpose-built equipment. It was on its way to becoming the global phenomenon we know today. Let's trace the journey of the scoring ball, the quaffle itself. Its history is a story of magical innovation, a clear progression from a simple, mundane object to a highly specialized piece of sporting equipment. Each change was designed to solve a practical problem, making the game faster, fairer, and more focused on the skill of the players. In its earliest form, as seen on Queerditch Marsh, the quaffle was nothing more than an ordinary leather ball. Early versions sometimes had straps or finger holes crudely cut into them to help the chasers, or catchers as they were then known, to grip the ball while flying one-handed. For centuries, this was the standard. The ball was unenchanted, meaning that if a chaser dropped it, it would simply plummet to the ground, forcing a player to dive down and retrieve it, slowing the game considerably. The first major innovation came in the winter of 1711. During a particularly muddy season, referees and players found it increasingly difficult to spot the brown leather ball against the mire of the pitch whenever it was dropped. To solve this, the decision was made to dye the quaffle a bright scarlet red, making it far more visible against the ground. This change was immediately adopted and has remained the standard color ever since. Ironically, this practical solution was almost immediately rendered obsolete by a stroke of magical genius that would revolutionize the chaser's game forever. In that very same year, 1711, a witch named Daisy Pennyfold was watching a game and had a brilliant idea. She decided to bewitch the quaffle with a charm that would make it fall through the air very slowly, as if it were sinking through water. This meant that when a chaser dropped the ball, it would no longer plummet to the ground. Instead, it would drift gently downwards, giving other chasers a chance to catch it in midair and continue the play without interruption. This invention, which became known as the Pennyfold Quaffle in her honor, transformed the game from a series of disjointed starts and stops into the fluid, aerial ballet of passing and scoring that we know today. The final major development in the quaffle's design came much later in 1875 with the discovery of gripping charms. When applied to the leather surface of the quaffle, these charms made it possible for a chaser to keep a firm, one-handed grip on the ball, even in high winds or during sharp turns, without the need for crude straps or finger holes. This innovation allowed for far more daring and athletic feats of flying and passing, cementing the quaffle's evolution from a simple leather ball into a perfectly designed piece of magical sporting equipment. From a muddy cabbage patch to the hands of the world's greatest athletes, the journey of the quaffle mirrors the journey of the sport itself. A constant drive towards greater speed, skill, and spectacle. Now, if the quaffle represents the skill and grace of Quidditch, the bludger represents its soul of chaos and violence. The evolution of this brutal ball was a long and painful process of trial and error, a search for the perfect combination of danger, durability, and magical malevolence. The story begins with the Bludgers, the bewitched flying rocks introduced on Queerditch Marsh in the 11th century. These were, quite literally, just large stones enchanted to fly around the pitch and attempt to knock players from their brooms. The name Bludger was grimly appropriate. referring to the likely effect of being struck by one. However, these primitive bludgers had a significant flaw. As the role of the beater emerged, and their bats became more powerful, a new problem arose. In the 15th century, beaters' bats were first magically reinforced, giving them superhuman strength. When one of these enchanted bats struck a bludder, the rock would often shatter, turning into a cloud of flying gravel that would continue to pursue the players, making the game even more dangerous and chaotic. This led wizards to search for a more durable material. The first experiment was with lead. Lead bludgers were an improvement in that they didn't shatter upon impact. However, they proved to be too soft. The magically reinforced bats of the beaters would leave significant dents and gashes on the surface of the lead balls. Over the course of a match, these indentations would ruin the bludgers' aerodynamic properties, causing them to fly in unpredictable, wobbling patterns instead of straight at their targets. The evidence for this failed experiment comes to us from the work of Agatha Chubb, an expert in ancient wizarding artifacts, who discovered over a dozen of these dented lead bludgers from the 16th century, preserved in peat bogs across Britain and Ireland. Finally, in the 1500s, the perfect material was found: iron. An iron ball, 10 inches in diameter and jet black, was heavy enough to be a serious threat, yet durable enough to withstand countless impacts from enchanted beaters' bats without losing its shape or flight capabilities. Bewitched to relentlessly pursue the nearest player, the modern iron bludger became the perfect agent of chaos. It was a persistent and formidable obstacle that could not be easily destroyed, forcing the beater position to evolve from one of simple brute force to one requiring immense skill, timing, and strategy. The journey from flying rock to bewitched iron had been a long one, but it had finally forged the bludger into the terrifying and essential element of the game that it remains to this day. Perhaps the most fascinating evolution belongs to the game's smallest yet most decisive element, the Golden Snitch. Of all the components of Quidditch, none has a history as rich, as dramatic, or as morally complex. Its story is not one of simple sporting evolution, but a grand tale of wizarding culture, animal cruelty, passionate activism, and ultimately, brilliant magical invention. It is the story of how the hunt for a tiny, magical bird transformed the game forever and created its most celebrated and iconic player, the Seeker. Our story begins not on the Quidditch pitch, but in the wilds of the wizarding world, with a creature known as the Golden Snidget. This tiny, perfectly spherical bird, about the size of a walnut, was covered in brilliant golden feathers and possessed a pair of fully rotational wings that allowed it to change direction with breathtaking, almost instantaneous speed. Its red, jewel-like eyes and remarkable agility made it a creature of great beauty and rarity. In the 12th century, the sport of snidget hunting became a popular, if cruel, pastime among the wealthy and powerful. The bird's incredible speed and ability to avoid predators made catching one a great testament to a wizard's skill, and many would wager vast sums on the outcome of a hunt. For over a century, Quidditch and Snidget hunting remained separate pursuits. That all changed in the year 1269, at a Quidditch match attended by a particularly boorish and influential wizard named Barbarous Brage, who was the chief of the Wizards' Council at the time. Growing bored with the game, Brage interrupted the proceedings by releasing a caged Golden Snidget onto the pitch. He then offered a massive prize of 150 galleons to whichever player could catch the tiny bird. The players immediately abandoned the quaffle and bludgers, and a frantic, chaotic chase for the Snidget ensued. This single, reckless act would change Quidditch forever. The idea caught on with explosive popularity. From that day forward, a Snidget was released at every Quidditch match, and a new position, originally called the Hunter, was added to each team with the sole purpose of catching it. The prize of 150 galleons was soon replaced with 150 points, a number chosen by Brage himself to signify the value of the prize money, and a score that remains to this day. However, not everyone was thrilled with this new development. The practice was inherently cruel, as the fragile Snidget was often crushed in the hand of the catching player. At that very same 1269 match, a witch named Modesty Rabnot stood up in protest. She stormed onto the pitch, shouting, "This is not sport! Let the Snidget go free, and let us watch the noble game of Quadditch," before successfully using a summoning charm to rescue the bird from the chaos. For her disruption of the game, Barbarous Brage fined her 10 galleons, a colossal sum of money in those days, which forced her to sell her home in Kent and move in with her sister in Aberdeen. Though her protest failed to stop the practice at the time, Modesty Rabnot's brave act planted a seed of conscience in the wizarding world. As the popularity of Quidditch exploded, the demand for Golden Snidget skyrocketed. The species, which was already rare, was hunted to the brink of extinction. The situation became so dire that by the middle of the 14th century, the Wizards' Council, now led by the far more enlightened Elfrida Clegg, was forced to act. Clegg, succeeding Brage as chief, officially declared the Golden Snidget a protected species, outlawing both its hunting and its use in Quidditch games. To ensure its survival, a number of Snidget reservations were established worldwide, the most famous of which was established in Somerset and named the Modesty Rabnot Golden Snidget Reservation, in honor of the witch who had first spoken out against the bird's mistreatment over a century earlier. This ban, while vital for the survival of the Snidget, left a gaping hole in the sport of Quidditch. The role of the hunter, now called the seeker, had become the game's most glamorous position, and the chase for the Snidget its most exciting element. A replacement was desperately needed. While many teams tried to find substitute birds, the true solution came from the mind of a brilliant wizard and skilled metal charmer from Godric's Hollow named Bowman Wright. Living in the mid-1300s, Wright set himself to the task of creating a mechanical ball that could perfectly mimic the behavior and flight patterns of the Golden Snidget. His invention was a masterpiece of magical engineering. The Golden Snitch, as he called it, was a walnut-sized ball of golden metal, weighing exactly the same as a Snidget. It was fitted with delicate silver wings and enchanted with complex rotational joints that allowed it to hover, dart, and change direction with the same lightning speed as its living counterpart. Crucially, Wright added a charm that prevented the Snitch from ever leaving the boundaries of the Quidditch pitch, a significant improvement over the often escaped Snidget. The final touch of genius was the flesh memory enchantment. Snitch makers began to wear gloves during its construction, as the ball was charmed to remember the first human to ever touch it. This innovation was designed to put an end to any disputes between seekers over who had caught the Snitch first, a common problem in the days of the fragile Snidget. With the invention of the Golden Snitch, the final piece of the Quidditch puzzle fell into place. The sport was now complete, its evolution from a chaotic folk game to a complex, regulated, and thrilling spectacle finally finished. With all its key elements now in place, the quaffle, the Bludgers, and the Golden Snitch, Quidditch entered a new era of explosive growth and formalization. The centuries that followed would see the sport transform from a loosely organized pastime into a highly regulated, professionalized, and global institution. This was the period where the muddy marsh was replaced by the grand stadium, where folk rules were codified into law, and where the tools of the game became a booming industry. Let us examine how the very field of play evolved. As Quidditch's popularity surged, the informal playing fields of its youth became increasingly inadequate. The game demanded a standardized arena, a defined space where the rules could be fairly applied, and the growing crowds of spectators could be safely managed. The evolution of the Quidditch pitch is a story of increasing sophistication and regulation. The earliest games on Queerditch Marsh used natural landmarks for goals, with players simply trying to throw the ball through clusters of trees at either end of the field. The first man-made goals appeared in the 12th century, as Goodwin Kneen's letter attests, in the form of large barrels set atop stilts. Over time, these were replaced by large, conical baskets on tall poles, a design that would remain in use for several centuries. The pitch itself began to take on a standardized form in the 14th century. It was defined as an oval-shaped field, 500 feet long and 180 feet wide, with a small 2-foot diameter circle marked in the very center where the referee would release the balls to start the game. A significant addition came in 1620, when the wizarding author Quintius Umfraville published his book, The Noble Sport of Warlocks. His work included the first known diagram of a Quidditch pitch, which clearly marked out scoring areas, curved lines around the goalposts that defined the keeper's territory. The final and most recognizable change to the pitch came much later, on February 12, 1883. On this date, the Department of Magical Games and Sports officially decreed that the baskets would be replaced by the elevated hoops of varying heights that we know today. This change, though met with grumbling from traditionalists who enjoyed setting the baskets on fire for a laugh, was made to ensure fairness and consistency across all official matches. Parallel to the evolution of the pitch was the codification of the rules. The first truly comprehensive description of the game as a whole was written in 1398 by a wizard named Zacharias Mumps, whose text described a sport that already closely resembled modern Quidditch. However, the game remained brutally violent. One of the most important steps in civilizing the sport came in 1538, when a widespread ban was placed on the use of wands against opposing players during a match. This single rule change fundamentally altered the nature of the game, shifting the focus from magical combat to athletic skill. Another key rule was introduced on June 22, 1884, when the practice of stooging was outlawed. This rule, which prevents more than one chaser from entering the scoring area at a time, was designed to protect keepers from being overwhelmed by multiple attackers and encouraged more strategic, passing-based offensive plays. Of course, no discussion of Quidditch rules is complete without mentioning the legendary list of 700 fouls. According to Quidditch Through the Ages, this exhaustive list was compiled following the final of the first ever Quidditch World Cup in 1473, a match between Transylvania and Flanders that was so astonishingly violent that every single one of the 700 fouls was committed. While the full list has been kept a closely guarded secret by the Department of Magical Games and Sports, out of a stated fear that publishing it might give players ideas, we do know of the 10 most common fouls. These include blagging, which is grabbing an opponent's broomstick, blatching, which is flying with the intent to collide, cobbing, the excessive use of elbows, and snitch-nip, which is any player other than the seeker touching the Golden Snitch. Many of the other 690 fouls are now historical curiosities, made impossible by the 1538 wand ban. These archaic infractions include such wonderfully absurd and brutal acts as setting fire to an opponent's broom tail, attacking an opponent's broom with a club, attacking an opponent with an axe, and even the transfiguration of a chaser into a polecat. The story of the 1473 World Cup serves as a legendary benchmark for the sport's savage past, a cautionary tale that perfectly justified the centuries of increasingly strict regulation that followed, transforming Quidditch from a bloody free-for-all into the noble sport of warlocks. As Quidditch professionalized, so too did its equipment. The rise of organized leagues created a fervent consumer market and a technological arms race, as players and teams sought any advantage they could get. The history of Quidditch gear is a story of commercial rivalry, magical innovation, and an ever-increasing focus on performance and player safety. The most crucial piece of equipment, the broomstick, underwent the most dramatic transformation. For centuries, brooms were handmade by individual wizards, with models like the Oakshaft 79 and the Moon Trimmer being known for their craftsmanship but lacking in high performance. The true birth of the racing broom came in 1926, when the brothers Bob, Bill, and Barnaby Allerton founded the Clean Sweep Broom Company. Their Clean Sweep 1 was the first broom designed and mass-produced specifically for sporting use, and it was an immediate sensation. This sparked a fierce market rivalry. In 1929, the Comet Trading Company was founded by Randolph Keach and Basil Horton, former players for the Falmouth Falcons. Their Comet 140 introduced the patented Horton-Keach braking charm, which made it much easier to control and less likely to overshoot the goalposts. For several decades, the Clean Sweep Comet rivalry dominated the market. This all changed in 1967 with the arrival of the Nimbus Racing Broom Company. Their first model, the Nimbus 1000, was revolutionary, capable of reaching speeds of up to 100 miles per hour and featuring unparalleled handling. It quickly became the broom of choice for professional teams across Europe. The Nimbus 2000, released in 1991, was hailed as the fastest broom in the world upon its release, and was the model gifted to Harry Potter in his first year, a broom praised for its lightness and speed, making it ideal for a seeker. Just a year later, it was surpassed by the Nimbus 2001, the model Lucius Malfoy famously bought for the entire Slytherin team in exchange for making his son Draco their seeker. The broomstick arms race reached its zenith in 1993 with the release of the Firebolt, an incredibly expensive, state-of-the-art racing broom. The Firebolt was constructed from ebony wood, featured an unbreakable braking charm, and incorporated goblin-made ironwork for power and stability, giving it a top speed of over 150 miles per hour. It was so advanced that it was immediately adopted by international teams, including the Irish and Bulgarian national squads for the 1994 World Cup. And it was, of course, the broom gifted to Harry by his godfather, Sirius Black, after his Nimbus 2000 was destroyed. As brooms became faster, the other equipment had to evolve to keep pace. The beater's bat, once a simple wooden club, had been magically reinforced since the 15th century to deal with the introduction of iron bludgers. This enchantment was not just for durability. It allowed skilled beaters to impart tremendous force and precision onto their shots, leading to the development of complex tactical moves, like the bludger backbeat, a powerful backhand swing, and the doppelbeater defense, where both beaters strike a bludger simultaneously for extra power. Player attire also changed dramatically. The earliest Quidditch robes, as seen in the first two Harry Potter films, were thick, heavy, and resembled school robes, offering little in the way of athletic performance. For Prisoner of Azkaban, the film's costume designer, Johnny Tamaimi, gave the uniforms a significant overhaul, to make the game look more like a recognizable modern sport. The robes became lighter and more athletic, featuring players' names and numbers on the back. By Half-Blood Prince, this evolution continued, with players wearing modern tracksuit-style clothing for training sessions. The match gear became a sophisticated blend of the modern and the historical. Players wore padded leather arm, chest, and shin guards reminiscent of the body armor worn by sportsmen in Edwardian England, while their helmets and pads took inspiration from early American football players. This increased focus on protective gear was a direct response to the escalating dangers of the game. As director David Yates noted, Quidditch is a terribly violent sport, and when you are flying at 60 miles per hour and colliding with other players or falling 50 feet, that level of protection becomes an absolute necessity. This feedback loop, where faster brooms led to a more dangerous game, which in turn demanded better protective equipment, drove the constant evolution of the Quidditch player's kit. With its rules codified, its equipment perfected, and its popularity soaring, Quidditch became more than just a sport. It became a cultural institution, a stage upon which rivalries were forged, heroes were made, and legends were born. From the hallowed grounds of Hogwarts to the grandest international stadiums, the game became the ultimate expression of wizarding passion, pride, and prowess. For most young witches and wizards in Britain, their first true taste of Quidditch comes at Hogwarts, where the sport is woven into the very fabric of school life. The annual Inter-House Quidditch Cup is the centerpiece of the school year, a fierce, round-robin tournament where each of the 4 houses, Gryffindor, Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, and Slytherin, plays each other once. The team with the most points at the end of the season is awarded the magnificent Silver Quidditch Cup, a trophy that was the singular obsession of Gryffindor's fanatical captain, Oliver Wood. The points scored in these matches also contribute to the year-long competition for the overall House Cup, though the exact relationship between the two has always been a matter of some debate among students. While the history of the Hogwarts Quidditch Cup stretches back centuries, we know, for instance, that Gryffindor's worst defeat in Harry's first year was their worst in 300 years. Our most vivid understanding of its drama and passion comes from the era just before and during Harry Potter's time at the school. In the years leading up to Harry's arrival, the tournament had been utterly dominated by Slytherin, who had secured the cup for 7 consecutive years. Gryffindor's hopes had rested on the shoulders of their legendary seeker, Charlie Weasley, but even his prodigious talent wasn't enough to break the Slytherin stranglehold before he graduated. Harry's arrival in 1991 marked the beginning of a golden era for Gryffindor Quidditch. Becoming the youngest house player in a century, his natural talent as a seeker immediately shifted the balance of power. His very first match against Slytherin became the stuff of legend when, after being illegally blocked by the Slytherin seeker Terrence Higgs, Harry nearly swallowed the Golden Snitch, catching it in his mouth to secure a 170-60 victory for Gryffindor. The following year, the rivalry intensified during a match against a Slytherin team newly equipped with top-of-the-line Nimbus 2001s. The game was marred by a rogue Bludger, bewitched by the house elf Dobby to target Harry exclusively. Despite suffering a broken arm from the relentless assault, Harry managed to catch the snitch right from under Draco Malfoy's nose, once again leading Gryffindor to victory before the tournament was ultimately cancelled due to the attacks from the Chamber of Secrets. Harry's third year was perhaps the most dramatic season of all. The first match, played against Hufflepuff in a torrential thunderstorm, ended in disaster when Dementors swarmed the pitch, causing Harry to faint and fall from his broom. The Hufflepuff seeker, Cedric Diggory, caught the snitch to win the match, though he honorably offered a rematch, an offer Oliver Wood declined. This loss only fueled Gryffindor's determination. They went on to defeat Ravenclaw, setting up a climactic final against their arch-rivals, Slytherin. The match was notoriously dirty, but Harry prevailed, catching the snitch to win the game 230-20, and securing the Quidditch Cup for Gryffindor for the first time in nearly a decade. The following years were tumultuous. The Quidditch Cup was cancelled in Harry's fourth year to make way for the Triwizard Tournament. In his fifth year, a post-match brawl provoked by Draco Malfoy resulted in Harry and the Weasley twins, Fred and George, receiving lifetime bans from the sport by the tyrannical Dolores Umbridge. In a moment of true team resilience, Ron Weasley stepped up as keeper, and Ginny Weasley took over as seeker, leading a rebuilt Gryffindor team to an unexpected and triumphant cup victory. Harry's sixth and final season as captain was equally chaotic. Ron suffered a crisis of confidence, which Harry cleverly resolved by pretending to spike his drink with Felix Felicis, a placebo that gave Ron the courage to play brilliantly against Slytherin. Harry himself was knocked unconscious in a match against Hufflepuff, and later forced to serve detention with Professor Snape during the final match against Ravenclaw. Yet again, Ginny stepped in as seeker, and Gryffindor pulled off another stunning victory to retain the cup. These matches at Hogwarts are more than just games. They are the moments where the abstract history and rules of Quidditch come alive, charged with the personal stakes, bitter rivalries, and unforgettable heroics that have made the sport a beloved cornerstone of the wizarding world. Beyond the school grounds, Quidditch thrives as a professional sport, a massive cultural force with legions of devoted fans. The backbone of this professional world is the British and Irish Quidditch League, an institution with a rich and storied history. The league was officially established in 1674. In an effort to maintain the international statute of secrecy and control the chaos of countless unregulated matches, the Department of Magical Games and Sports selected the 13 best teams in Britain and Ireland to form an official league, asking all other teams to disband. This decision, while controversial, created a structured, high-level competition that has flourished for over 3 centuries. The 13 teams of the league are not just sporting clubs. They are cultural institutions, each with a unique identity, a passionate fan base, and a history filled with legendary players and unforgettable moments. Among the most venerable of these is Puddlemere United, the oldest team in the league, founded way back in 1163, known for their navy blue robes emblazoned with two crossed golden bulrushes. Puddlemere has a reputation for solid, dependable play, having won the League Cup 22 times. Their team anthem, the rousing "Beat Back Those Bludgers Boys" and "Chuck That Quaffle Here," was famously recorded by the singing sorceress Celestina Warbeck to raise funds for St. Mungo's Hospital. They are also the team of choice for Albus Dumbledore, and after his graduation from Hogwarts, became the professional home of former Gryffindor captain Oliver Wood, who joined their reserve team. Equally famous are the Holyhead Harpies, a Welsh team founded in 1203, renowned for being the only all-female team in the league. Wearing dark green robes with a golden talon on the chest, the Harpies have a reputation for fierce, aggressive play. Their most famous player was the brilliant but dangerous beater, Gwennog Jones, who captained the team for many years. After leaving Hogwarts, Ginny Weasley, a lifelong fan of the team, fulfilled her dream by playing chaser for the Harpies professionally. The most successful team in the league's history, however, is the Montrose Magpies from Scotland, with an incredible 32 League Cup victories and 2 European Cup titles. The Magpies are a global powerhouse. They play in black and white robes and have fielded some of the greatest players of all time, including the legendary Seeker Eunice Murray, who was so dominant that she once petitioned the Ministry to make the snitch faster because catching it was just too easy. Minerva McGonagall is known to be a devoted supporter of the Magpies. Of course, not all teams can be champions. No team embodies the spirit of loyal, long-suffering fandom more than the Chudley Cannons, Ron Weasley's beloved team. Playing in vivid orange robes, the Cannons have a glorious past, with 21 League Cup wins to their name. However, their last victory was in 1892, and the subsequent century has been one of almost comical failure. This decline is perfectly captured by their motto, which was changed in 1972 from the proud "We shall conquer" to the far more realistic "Let's all just keep our fingers crossed and hope for the best." The league is filled with other colorful teams, each adding to the rich tapestry of the sport. There are the Falmouth Falcons, a hard-playing team from Cornwall whose motto is, "Let us win. But if we cannot win, let us break a few heads," and who were once home to the notoriously violent Beater brothers, Kevin and Carl Broadmoor. The Wimborne Wasps, Ludo Bagman's former team, earned their name in the 17th century when one of their beaters batted a wasp's nest at an opposing seeker. The Toots Hill Tornadoes hold the record for the fastest ever snitch capture, a blistering 3.5 seconds, set by Roderick Plumpton in 1921. and the Wigtown Wanderers, a Scottish team founded by the 7 children of a butcher, still wear a silver meat cleaver on their blood-red robes in honor of their origins. These teams, with their unique histories, regional identities, and passionate fans, are what make Quidditch more than just a game. They make it the beating heart of the British and Irish wizarding communities. Now we reach the pinnacle of Quidditch competition, the ultimate expression of national pride and magical sporting prowess, the Quidditch World Cup. Held every 4 years since its inception in 1473, this global tournament brings together the best national teams from around the world in a spectacular and often chaotic celebration of the sport. The tournament's format is a colossal undertaking. Any country can enter a team, and these teams are then divided into 16 groups. Over a 2-year period, they play a round-robin within their groups until 16 qualifying teams remain. These 16 teams then enter a single-elimination knockout tournament, with the final 2 teams facing off for the coveted World Cup trophy. For its first 2 centuries, the tournament was an exclusively European affair, but it expanded to include teams from all continents in the 17th century, truly becoming a World Cup. The greatest challenge for the World Cup has always been secrecy. Hosting an event that routinely attracts over 100,000 spectators is a logistical nightmare under the international statute of secrecy. This monumental task falls to a special regulatory body, the International Confederation of Wizards Quidditch Committee, or ICWQC. It is their unenviable job to find suitable venues, vast, remote moors, deserts, and deserted islands, and to arrange secure transportation for the massive crowds, all while remaining completely invisible to the Muggle world. Given the high stakes and the passionate, often volatile nature of international competition, the history of the World Cup is littered with infamous, bizarre, and legendary events. The very first final in 1473 between Transylvania and Flanders set the tone, going down in history as the most violent match of all time, where all 700 known fouls were committed. The 1809 final is remembered for the attack of the Killer Forest. In a fit of uncontrollable rage, a Romanian player named Nico Nenad deliberately hit a bludger into the forest bordering the stadium. He had secretly jinxed the entire forest beforehand, and the trees immediately sprang to life, uprooting themselves and marching on the stadium, turning the Quidditch final into a 7-hour battle between wizards and a homicidal forest. Then there was the 1877 tournament nobody remembers. Held in the Rin Desert in Kazakhstan, the entire event was mysteriously erased from the memory of every player, official, and spectator. The leading theory blames a mass memory charm perpetrated by the Goblin Liberation Front, but no one knows for sure. Team mascots have also been a frequent source of chaos. A motion to restrict mascots to herbivores and creatures that don't breathe fire was overwhelmingly defeated in 1995, with fans arguing that intimidating mascots were a traditional part of the spectacle. This led directly to the disastrous opening ceremony of the 2014 World Cup in the Patagonian desert. The ceremony descended into a bloodbath when the Fijian mascot, a shape-shifting Dukuwaka, and the Norwegian mascot, a giant Selma sea serpent, were released into the same lake and immediately attacked each other. The chaos escalated as Brazilian Curupiras attacked the handlers. Nigerian Sasabonsams went on a vampiric frenzy, and the Haitian team's mascots were revealed to be actual inferi, which stampeded through the terrified crowd. However, for many, the most memorable World Cup of all is the 422nd tournament, held in 1994 on Dartmoor, England. The final pitted the powerhouse Irish national team against the underdog Bulgarians, who had been carried to the final by the prodigious talent of their 18-year-old seeker, Victor Crumb. The atmosphere was electric, with Ireland's leprechaun mascots creating shimmering rainbows over the stadium, and Bulgaria's Vila enchanting the crowd with their hypnotic dance. The match itself was a brutal, fast-paced affair. The Irish chasers, Troy, Mullet, and Moran, were a perfectly coordinated force, racking up goal after goal and quickly building a commanding lead. Bulgaria's only hope was Crumb, whose breathtaking flying skills were on full display. He famously executed a perfect Wronski feint, a death-defying dive that tricked the Irish seeker, Aidan Lynch, into crashing headfirst into the pitch. The game reached its climax as the Irish lead grew to 170 points to Bulgaria's 10. At that moment, Crumb spotted the snitch. In a move that would be debated for decades, he dove and caught it. The catch awarded Bulgaria 150 points, but it also ended the game, handing a 170 to 160 victory to Ireland. It was a stunning and controversial decision. Crumb, knowing his team was hopelessly outmatched by the Irish chasers, chose to end the match on his own terms, securing a respectable loss rather than suffering a humiliating blowout. While Ireland celebrated their World Cup victory, the night was far from over. The post-match festivities were shattered by a terrifying riot as a group of Death Eaters stormed the campsite, torturing muggles and casting the dark mark into the sky, a grim omen of the dark times to come. From its humble beginnings, Quidditch had spread across the globe. It was introduced to New Zealand in the 17th century by British herbologists and to Australia in the 18th. In North America, its popularity was initially hampered by the existence of a rival native broom game called Quadpot, in which the quaffle would explode. But eventually, Quidditch prevailed, becoming the one true global sport of the wizarding world, a testament to its enduring power to capture the hearts and imaginations of witches and wizards on every continent. From a muddy bog in medieval England to the grandest stage of international sport, the journey of Quidditch has been long, chaotic, and utterly magical. It is a sport that reflects the very world that created it. A world of breathtaking beauty and brutal danger, of ancient traditions and constant innovation, of fierce rivalries and a deep, unifying passion. It is more than just a game. It is a 1,000-year saga written in the sky. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the lore of the wizarding world.